Good morning, my fellow humans. I'm going to be yapping about the evolution of Dune from its 1984 original, 2021 version, a little bit, and a fair bit of the 2024 Dune Part 2. So start. It's a sci-fi action adventure drama. So there's three powerful families, or what they're actually called in the film, houses. They fight for control over the universe. There's a bunch of other smaller ones, but they're not really mentioned at all in the films. There's the House of Carino, which is the dominant one, and they are ruling imperial house in the universe. There's House Atreides, which is the defiant and rebellious ones, and their nature of doing these defiant and rebellious actions, it's driving their support for them, giving them a lot more power. House Harkonnen, on the other hand, and they have a gross amount of wealth and power. In the newer Dune film, they make them look like they are gross with power. They have all this power by controlling Arrakis, which is the most important planet, because spice that is used for space travel. The film also follows the Atreides takeover and battle for Arrakis, alongside the natives, the Fremen.
Listen, I gave.
This story follows Paul Atreides after the death of his father. Paul travels deep into the desert to find the Fremen. He allies with them, and he uses this prophecy to gain their trust. And together, they ended up fighting back the Harkonnens who had attacked the Atreides. So the plot and film structure is very interesting. The story is actually pretty close, but the plot is slightly different, and it's more detailed in the newer version. So Duncan's death actually happens a lot sooner in the original film. Like, he dies at the battle for Arrakis. Leto Atreides' poison tooth scene is it's done way differently. The original, he shoots a puff of smoke at one of the Baron's servants rather than the Baron himself. The new one, poison gas at the Baron and everyone in the room. The way Paul meets and joins Fremen is different. I was shocked when I had discovered this. Paul just randomly decides, oh, we're now with you, and they completely are okay with it. The newer ones, no, there's a bit of resistance and conflict to. So 1984 film structure. It's got a 3-act structure like most films. It starts with the introduction of our antagonist's goal, not the characters, and also a guild navigator, which was never seen in the newer films. Then it leads to the introduction of our characters, Paul, his mother, Leto, the inciting incident, fall of the Atreides. Leads us over to Paul and his mother joining the Fremen as they had fled into the desert, and Paul and the Fremen together, they cut off basically their entire spice supplies. Then it leads to the Emperor discovering this, and he plans to send soldiers to Arrakis to deal some big damage to everybody. Paul prepares himself and the Fremen for a massive war. Then, third act, Paul and the Fremen attack the Emperor and the Harkonnen. The roles have been flipped. In the beginning, it was the Atreides being attacked by the Emperor and Harkonnen, but now the Atreides and the Fremen attack the Emperor and the Harkonnen. Paul then duels Feyd-Rautha, which is supposed to be the last of the royal Harkonnens, but they do a terrible job of this because there's a bunch more Harkonnens right beside him. And in the end, Paul brings peace and prosperity to Arrakis with fair reign on a desert planet. I was flabbergasted by this. It's a 5-act structure. So it takes that second act and just splits it up. So Act 1 is when Paul literally awakens from his sleep, and he has no knowledge of this prophecy that he's supposedly involved in. At the very end of this act, he does discover. Act 2 doesn't really want to believe prophecy, so he pushes it under the rug, ignores it. Then Act 3, he accepts this, and he begins his journey through as his prophet. By the way, this is when Atreides is destroyed. Act 4, fear and reluctance. Once again, he doesn't want to believe that he is a part of this prophecy because he has a long future of violence and destruction. He wants a peaceful resolution. And then in Act 5, he embraces his violence. He gets his first kill against that guy you actually see in the picture right there. That's how he gets accepted into the Fremen. Now, I got 2 scenes here. I've put the links up in the thingy. It's literally the exact same scene, 40 years apart. So, as you saw right there, mise-en-scène, 1984 Dune. Setting very complex and detailed, can kind of pull our attention away from what's actually going on. There's a ton of Harkonnen emperors, people present, alongside lots more Fremen, but they're all scattered around the room rather than being condensed in one area. Paul also makes demands through his power and fear that he emanates. The Emperor's armies to flee the planet. Fade responds to Paul's demands like a rebellious child, saying that he is not the righteous. And other antagonists like the Emperor and Reverend Mother, they're basically ignorant old people. Dune Part 2 though, it's way different. So it has a strong yellow lighting to feel like it's epic, and it gives silhouettes to the characters a lot of the time. It also is very crowded, yet also feels super open. One side looks super crowded, but the part we're mostly looking at, it's very open. It's not overwhelming. There's a lot of Fremen and Harkonnen/Carino soldiers in the room. Like the original though, Fremen is more scattered around, and all eyes are on Paul Atreides and Fade Routha's duel. There's a lot simpler set pieces instead of the complex and detailed design to have us focus on the battle at hand and our other main characters that are surrounding this battle. So the camera work in 1984, it was actually very sloppy. Most of the second half of the film was extremely sloppy camera work. So Paul's entrance though was elevated because a higher staircase and he's coming down that staircase. That is to show his elevated power. It has the camera at that low angle shot. It's a very long cut. Emperor's entrance was then lower. It was like 2 steps rather than 15 to show who is weaker. When it shows the Emperor coming in, it'll have that mid-long shot to be able to show all the characters. And when it's speaking one to many, so during Paul's speech to the Emperor, it uses an over-the-shoulder shot to show Paul speaking while also showing the recipients on the other end. And it uses a ton of close-ups to show lots of emotion in the characters. Mind you, the actors were doing a pretty terrible job, but they did not show very much emotion. It doesn't use a low or high angle shots during these speeches. And this is to show poker face on each character, making them look like we are not weaker or stronger. We are all equal. But truly, there's one or the other that has a lot more. During the fight scene, it uses lots of mid-range and close-up shots to show either combat with our characters or the emotion. And during the fight scenes, it uses a shaky camera 90% of the time. While the speeches, it was all very still camera work. In Dune Part 2, the camera work is way on point.
It was perfect. Perfect. Everything, down to the last minute details.
It has lots of close-ups on all characters to show reaction/emotion. So when a major turn of events in the battle happens, it'll switch to each character's face, showing in fear or anger or relief. The camera also focuses primarily on speaker/recipient. So let's say if Fade Routha is saying something about Shani, it'll show Fade Routha speaking, recipient on the other end a little bit. It has very few low or high angle shots again until
a few minutes later,
and instead uses the characters' head positions to show their strength, intimidation. For one example, Fade Routha actually is looking, his head pointing down, but his eyes are facing straight, and it looks very intimidating. And during the fight, camera focuses on the actions. So let's say the Fade Routha tries to stab Paul, it will focus on the side where that is happening. So if it's his right hand, it'll stay on the right side of Fade Routha. And if it's both attacking, then kind of zooms out on both. It goes for a mid to long range shot. And the camera, it feels like you are the camera, and you are literally, it feels like you are in the room with Paul and Fade dueling it out. And when there's a higher threat, the camera gets closer. When Paul gets knocked to the ground, it gets a lot closer to him. And that's when our high or low angle shots start to kick in. It'll have that high angle shot on Paul and Fade towering over Paul to make him look like he has the advantage, because he does. So as he had gone stabbed, it goes to Gurney, Stilgar, and Shani, and his mother. There is some big differences between the camera work. Way more connected Dune Part 2. Now, the special one I wanted to do was choreography. This scene has a ton of choreography on both sides. So 1984, it's slower but very strong movement. Doesn't have a lot of martial arts. Fade, instead of being more psychotic and intimidating, he's more jittery and almost like an ADHD child. And Fade is also trying to put on a show almost all the time, screaming, "I will kill him." But Paul, on the other hand, is on the defensive till the very end. Every attack Fade does, Paul counters it. Paul is also more composed and he always gets up. Dune Part 2 on the other hand does it very differently, very fast and powerful. Every single movement you see there, you will feel like you're about to get stabbed or you're about to get cut. Like a lot of the movements, there's some kind of martial arts incorporated into it. Now, Feyd-Rautha seems like a competent yet very psychotic warrior, just wants to win, and he wants a good fight. Paul Atreides is, on the other hand, very honorable, but fierce and vengeful. There's also a lot of movement, so the more movement, the more cuts there will be, while the less movement, there will be very few cuts in there. So now, why are they different? I need to wrap this up as fast as I can. Plot speed in Dune 1984. In the first half, it was pretty slow, doing a lot of world building. In the second half, it rushes it. It's actually not doing it in the second half, it's more like doing it in the final third. And it rushes the plot to conclude this really, really big story in a reasonable time, which at that time, that was a long movie. 2 hours and almost 30 minutes. Dune 2021 and Dune Part 2 take the time to flesh out these stories. Have a lot more time to work with in the 6 hours, and soon 9 hours with that third installment. And the other difference is a sloppy cinematography. And sometimes it has cuts to characters that the viewer doesn't care to see. Why is it showing this big eyebrow guy, which by the way I don't even know the name of because they didn't really show him enough. There's a lot of things that happen in the 1984 that are completely unnecessary. While Dune Part 2, every single scene, shot, cut, everything has some sort of purpose to a greater story. Paul's riding a sandworm, it will reasonably cut to our three main characters that are on the dunes, watching him ride this gigantic worm. For blending everything between the cuts, camera shots, and choreography, they each feel like their own piece in Dune 1984. So the cuts feel like their own thing, camera shots feel like their own thing, choreography feels like its own thing. Dune Part 2, it feels like one big flowing, beautiful, watery part. The choreography seems like it's in sync with the camera shots and the cuts. The story seems like it's in sync with the camera shots. The editing seems like it's in sync with the camera shots. Everything is in sync with the newer versions. 1984 was rushed and tried cramming too much in too short time. Overall, all three films are quite different. The newer two being a little closer since they are correlated, but that of 1984 differs greatly. It's still an amazing watch. I really recommend you watch it. It's actually on YouTube. I do have a link to it, and you can see where Star Wars gets a lot of inspirations. And that's all I got for you. That was super long, and I thank you for watching and not losing your attention. This was a ton of work, so please have mercy on my remarks.